Hi, this is Simon Obsdale and welcome to another tutorial for Blender. And this is the seventh and final part of a multi-part tutorial in which we've been taking a look at how I built this steampunk fish scene. So, because I want to make sure that we actually finish this project within this tutorial, what I've done is I've pushed ahead and finished everything off, given it some materials and so on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of talk you through my process rather than show you every individual bit, because I'm sure you'll be able to work out how to do it. So the first thing I did was to create a dome to go over the main assembly like this. And so this is basically a UV sphere, which I've chopped off the back of it and then I've squished it down on Y. And I've scaled it and fitted it so it's exactly the same dimensions and position as this main core element there. And you can actually copy the positions from one thing to another, as I did here, and that's an easy way of getting it all lined up, especially since these numbers are a little bit long. Then what I did was I duplicated this dome and I shrunk it down and I placed it over the eye over here to cover that mechanism. And both of these obviously in the final analysis are going to be glass like this, and it's going to add a little bit of kind of interesting shine and more texture to the whole affair. So another thing I did was to grab some faces over here and just move some points around a little bit and then extrude them to make this panel here, which is a kind of extra little bit of detail. That's a fairly easy thing to do. And then obviously adding in the bolts sells the idea that it's a detachable panel. You'll see I've put bolts everywhere I couldn't find them, and you know, I went into Bolt Factory and just made a few more bolts to play with. These ones are kind of fairly elaborate, these big ones here, and these ones here are just studs, so just rounded domes basically. And I used the snapping technique to get them to sort of line up onto the surface here. Oh, I haven't done very well there because I haven't got the rotation right, but never mind, you get the idea. And let's talk about these creases here. So again, let's come into edit mode. And what I did was I found an available loop, or I adjusted an available loop to be where I wanted it to be. And then I added loop cuts on either side of it, very, very tight to it. So then what I could do is I could take the middle row of edges and just move it in, and it creates this fold here, which is kind of nice. It looks as though it's been made out of different panels. So I did that a number of times. Much better with the lighting. You can see how those actually work, those creases there. So I'm not going to do that because it's pretty obvious how you do that, and it's a little bit fiddly. What I then had to do was go through and UV map everything in order to apply the textures. So let's look at the body first of all. So we can come into UV editing. I'm sure you know how to do this. So in edit mode, select a face and then A to select all faces. And then what we can do is U for the unwrap tool and unwrap. And you can see that it's unwrapped it to use the texture. So I've done that with all the available surfaces that I wanted to make into this brass material, which is basically everything. So let's look at this one, for example, this dorsal fin. You can see I haven't done a terribly good job there. I've just let it to the defaults. One could have actually probably sort of scaled it out on X to make more use of the texture like that, and move it over till it fits like that. But the default was looking fairly good. So lots and lots of little bits that you've got to kind of UV map in order to get this to work. The technique isn't the same in each case. The only difference is with this dome, or the two domes, I went about it a different way. So let's select a face. Instead of UV unwrapping, which gives me that, I used U and project from view bands, and that gives us a better, more useful result, I think, in those two cases. But that's the only real exception to that. So let's just talk finally about the shading. I haven't actually labeled this properly. This is not very good. Let's call it brass, so we know what we're talking about here. And there are 4 texture maps which you'll be able to find in the assets folder. One for the diffuse, one for the specular, one for the roughness, and one for the normal. And the normal obviously needs to go through a normal map into the normal input. So diffuse into the base color, specular into specular, roughness into roughness, and normal, as I say, into normal via the normal map. And the only thing I've otherwise done with this shader is to turn them metallic all the way up to 1. So that should be fairly easy for you to replicate. And let's look at the glass here. So what I've done here is I've simply used a glass BSDF. Obviously you need to be in cycles for the glass to actually work. And again, there will be a texture for glass roughness that I've piped into the roughness of the shader. And what that does, if we look back at our rendered view, it gives us this kind of uneven look to the glass, as though it's been scuffed and it's dirty and whatever. And that I think really helps. Oh, I need to come back to modelling because there's one whole area that I've completely omitted to talk about. Let us turn off this dome. And what I did was I took one of these rotors, probably from down here, and I duplicated it and I put 6 of them into the middle here. And all I did was I lined up the teeth so they look like they're interacting. And then I wanted 2 sets of 3, as it were. And you've noticed I've kind of slightly offset this group of 3 slightly further back than this lot here. And in order to do that animation, so you can see they're animating like this, basically what I did in each case, I got one of the cogs to drive the other pair. So what I did obviously was I added a driver to this cog here, the center cog. And in that case, I've used frame times 0.4 to get the speed. And then with the outer 2, edit their drivers. So I added a driver to them. And instead of using themselves as the source, I used a var, which was the central cog, which I called slow A. And I used its Y rotation as the type. And then I just typed var times -1, which makes it go in the opposite direction. And I did the same thing for this other one here. You can see I've used var times -1. And so now when they run, these 2 run in opposite direction to the one they're being driven by, just as they should. And it all looks, they're all kind of perfectly in sync. And I did exactly the same with this one. I got these 2 to be driven by this one. And obviously the reason I did it that way is if you want to change the speed of one set, you only have to change 1 variable, not 3 variables in each case. So I think that's a better way of doing it. You want to try and avoid having speeds that are actually in sync with the frame rate, because if you do that, then you'll find that they look stationary. It's that familiar thing of the helicopter in midair. If the rotor blades are perfectly in sync with the camera shutter, it looks as though the rotor blades rather terrifyingly are not actually rotating, and it's simply because they're in sync. So if you, in this case, we actually want to make sure that they look like they're going round. So it's a good idea to kind of give them a strange multiplier in order to make sure that doesn't look like that. So I think I've pretty much covered it. Obviously what I did was I moved some lights around. I did put a light inside this cavity here and another light inside the eye. Let's have a look at the lights. In fact, let's come to the rendered view and just turn off the lights and see what I've done. This is a kind of side light that's illuminating the tail fin there. I just kind of wanted to get all the details lit up in some way or another. Then this is the light for the eye here. If I turn that on and off, you can see it's lighting up inside the eye. That's quite important. Light 2 is lighting up the cogs like that. I turn the dome back on again. You can see the difference. If I don't have the cogs illuminated with the dome on, we barely see them. So that's why I've put a light in there. It's probably a little bit too strong, I think, but anyway. And then the original light is kind of just lighting up from the right-hand side here. And I think that's basically it. It's been a very, very long journey, and you've been very patient in sticking with it so far. I hope you've been able to follow this last tutorial and do the same yourself. If not, please drop me a line and I will try to help you out. So thanks very much indeed for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.